In the immortal words of Jay-Z, can I get an encore? Do you want more? Welcome back to Frankly Speaking, presented by Betway. If you're going to place a bet, bet on Betway. 19 plus, please play responsibly. Today's guest is Stan Bowman in his first year as general manager of the Edmonton Oilers, who last year got as close to winning the Stanley Cup as any team in history to not win it. Game 7, 2 goals away. It's hard now not to think of the disappointment and pain in the players' faces post-game and contrast that to Connor McDavid playing the role of hero and lifting Team Canada to the Four Nations Faceoff overtime win in Boston last week. What do the Oilers have in store for an encore? There's plenty of chapters left to be written in the Oilers' story, but Bowman, a man named after Lord Stanley's mug and a 3-time Cup winner in his own right with the Chicago Blackhawks, is the author holding the pen, at least leading up to the trade deadline on March 7th. In our conversation today, we'll touch on the health of Evander Kane and his salary cap impact on the Oilers' deadline plans, the rising cap and how it might impact deals for McDavid and Evan Bouchard, the play of Edmonton's goaltenders, as well as Bowman's overall deadline philosophy. Now, it's important to note that this conversation with Stan Bowman was taped last Friday on the heels of the Four Nation Faceoff and before a very disappointing weekend to kick off the last third of the season for the Oilers, who were crushed by the Flyers and the Eastern Conference leading Washington Capitals. That said, still important perspective, because I wouldn't think that 2 games in a long 82-game season would change much of the overall philosophy, but you'll get a great peek into that now in my conversation with Edmonton Oilers general manager Stan Bowman. Stan Bowman, you've been at the helm of the Edmonton Oilers for just about 6 full months now. Watching your team play and getting a good handle on everything, is there anything that's surprised you or maybe you didn't necessarily appreciate from afar?
That's a good question. I guess first comment would just be, how talented the Connor and Leon are up close. Like you watch them as a fan, from the outside, and you enjoy, see that what they can do, and they're fun to watch. I love watching great players like that. And then you get to see them every day, and it's pretty special to see just how good they are, up close and personal, and you see, the great guys too, great teammates, and how much, they mean to the group. So that's been fun. And then getting to know the coaching staff. I think they probably don't get enough credit. They do a great job with our group, preparing them, but also they have a good feel for how to get the most out of our players. I think I really like the way that they interact with the team and the way they manage the lineup. I think they do a great job. And then I think probably our group as a whole doesn't get a lot of credit maybe for the way that we play as a team and the way that we defend. I think we do a really good job. It's not just the defensemen. I mean, certainly they do a good job, but I think as a unit of 5 on the ice, we do a really good job managing the puck, putting ourselves in good positions so that, we can have a 6, most games we're in it. We haven't had too many games this year where you don't win them all, but we haven't had many games when we've been just out of it from the start. I think part of that's our goaltending as well. I think there's maybe just some narratives around the team that aren't really, when you get to see us every day, I think it's maybe not quite that accurate. I think we've done a good job of being in the mix most nights, and that's why our record's been good. We've had some good runs here. It was a slow start in the month of October. We weren't really clicking, and but once we got things into November, I feel like from that point on we've been pretty consistent. Maybe not that flashy, we're not always maybe at the top of our game, but our bottom level isn't too low. So as a result, we're pretty competitive most nights.
Mm-hmm. One narrative that is accurate is that you've been blessed in your managerial career to spend time around some really high-end players, and you mentioned Connor and Leon, but I'm curious if just your experience from Chicago and spending time around Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane, do you see any similarities in terms of how they approach the game? Totally different players, of course, but just the way they go about their business.
Yeah, I mean, super motivated to make a difference every night. you could probably make the argument for most players want to, but it seems like the top guys, they just really, they look at that as their role is to lead the team. And I think that, Connor and Leon are that way. You're right. In Chicago, we had a lot of guys, Kane and Toews and Hossa and Sharp. We have guys in the back end, Seabrook and Keith, that wanted to make a difference and understood their importance to the team. So you're right. I think it's been blessed to be around these guys. They're amazing athletes, but they're really driven and motivated to make a difference, which I think is fun to see. And, they're awesome teammates too. Like, they're great leaders. You can see now when you're around them a lot, you can see, why they are so unique and so special. So we've got a great thing going.
I'm sure you were tuned into the Four Nations Faceoff, just like even non-hockey fans were at the championship game on Thursday night. You see Connor score that goal to win it in OT. What were your emotions like watching it, and what do you think it'll do for him moving forward? Everyone wants to kind of create a script here. Hey, this is a guy, success from Team Canada. Does it rub off on him to get him over the hump? I'm like, guys, he got to Game 7 of the Cup final last year. I think he's doing all right.
Yeah. I think just, watching that play develop, he's able to catch the pass and, within an instant, he releases it in the perfect spot. It wasn't like it had to be a pretty accurate shot in order to get that winning goal. And I think that's what the great players can do, is they, in those moments, obviously it's overtime of a big event, and the difference between winning and losing is oftentimes just, can you capitalize and find a way in that moment? And the great ones usually find a way. So I think that was certainly a big moment for Connor. I'm really happy for him to see on the big stage, for him to come through like that. It certainly shows you what kind of player he is.
Mm-hmm. And I mentioned the guys in Chicago. I wanted to ask you just a cap question. Everyone's curious, hey, what happens moving forward here? I'm sure you guys in your department or in your front office were thinking about and projecting what the cap could look like. We see these 3 years of increases now agreed upon and on the table. What does that do for you? And did the numbers come in where you thought they might?
Well, it was a lot of speculation going back even to last summer, when we were paying close attention to that, because we had these, Leon's contract to get done last summer. And then we've got some important ones this summer as well. So we spent a lot of time looking at the numbers. We certainly had a feeling it was going up just based on, the revenues. I think obviously it's a mathematical formula of, there's this strange period we're in where we're trying to, usually it's the other way around when you're trying to chase the cap versus chase the revenues. So I think, we know that the revenues have been very strong, which is a great sign for our league. So it was just a matter of, were they going to do, what was the increase going to be? We knew it was going to go up, the mandated 5%, but how much more would it go up, and how would they handle those future years? So I'm not shocked at where the numbers ended up. As far as what does it mean for us or every team, I think it's you can kind of go both ways with it, because certainly the cap is higher than it's been, but usually that just means that when you talk to agents, they just want more money than for their players. So I don't know if it really changes anything. It's the market will reset itself probably as we go, and I don't know how it's going to all play out. I mean, that's to be determined over the next 18 months. Is just what happens with contracts, because the cap's been somewhat flat for a while now. Going back, it hasn't risen much in the last 4 or 5 years, and now it's starting to take some bigger jumps. So correspondingly, what happens with salaries, whether it's restricted free agents or unrestricted, we'll see. We'll have to see how that plays out.
Mm-hmm. So I think you were the first manager to sign multiple players to 8-figure AAV deals with Toews and Kane. I'm just curious, we know that Leon's deal is done, and obviously Connor's already in that range, so no surprises in terms of where that's heading next. But did you learn anything philosophically about the way you manage the cap and built your team? Would you do anything different?
Well, I think building your team is one thing. Having, low price players is a paramount thing, whether that's through the draft and develop model or whether it's through the free agent model, whether it's, North American or European free agents. I think you have to have low price players that can come into your lineup and help you. At the end of the day, you still need the stars to be a successful team. I don't think there's been any team that's won that's just been a bunch of nice players. Like every team that wins, you have to have the stars, and they're going to make the money, and they should. I mean, it's really difficult to do what the best players in the league do, and we just saw it on display at this Four Nations. Like it's, there's a lot of great players in this game, and they should be paid well. I mean, they do things that are really hard to do. So I think, but you don't want to begrudge them the money because it's really difficult to, change the outcome of a game by yourself. So if you need those impact players, but that's not all you need. I think you can't just win with that. You have to have supporting players as well. And then the question is, well, how many of them can you afford? How many high-end guys can you have? How many mid-price players? And then how many sort of lower-price guys? There's certainly some differences of opinion there. And I don't know if there's a right or wrong way to do it. Some teams who've been successful lately have approached it maybe a little differently. So there's some variability on the approach. And that's something we talk a lot about internally, is trying to find out what is the right blueprint for our group, knowing that you can take lessons from what works elsewhere, but you can't, it's not just a blueprint that you copy. I think each market and each team's somewhat unique.
So do you think when you're looking at the rest of the league, you're right, the trend, at least for some of the teams that have won recently, has been the stars get a huge chunk of the cap and then they kind of fill in the rest, at least while times have been tight, out of COVID, with a lot of guys making a little. Do you see, not Oilers specific, but league wide, do you see the middle class getting more money, so to speak, in the NHL, or do you see the stars just grabbing more of the increase?
That's what I was saying. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll have to see how that plays out. I mean, certainly if you talk to the agents of those top players, they're probably going to make the argument that they should get more.
But the agents might have more middle class guys, so maybe they just want those guys to get more.
Yeah.
So everyone wants more, Stan.
Right. No, I get it, and understandable. And like I've always said, you never, when players play well, they should be rewarded. I mean, they have a tough job to go out there and make a difference on the ice. So it's just putting that puzzle together. So I'll be interested to see how that plays out in the coming, certainly this summer will be the first time when we've never really had this situation before where you knew where the cap was going each year. Like even if you rewind it 10 years in the past, it wasn't really spelled out like that way. Usually you knew it would go up but you didn't know the way it was going up. Now, we have more clarity. So it's difficult to predict what impact that's going to have. I'll be interested to see myself what happens.
Mm-hmm. Related, unrelated. Evan Bouchard has had an interesting season. He's been, I think, pretty vocally criticized at times in the media. But speaking of what you were just touching on, he also does so many things that so few players in this league can do. How do you size up his season, and what do you see moving forward for him?
Yeah, Bouch does get a lot of criticism. I think, unfairly so. He's a great player. He really is a big part of our team. He's very effective. And I think sometimes when, for whatever reason, certain players, when everyone makes mistakes, but sometimes if your mistakes get spotlighted for whatever reason, then maybe there's more attention given to it. And but he's played well. Like he's very good at complementing our best players. So that's an important role. Like when you've got really creative offensive players who are forwards, you need to have somebody that can help them score and
Is that a skill in and of itself? Like, I was
Mhm.
just thinking about this during Four Nations. Just because you put great players with great players doesn't necessarily mean you're going to see results.
Right. It is. I think it's an overlooked thing. So I think Bush is really good at that. He's got a ton of patience. He's got a lot of poise. And I think sometimes that's what people see is no, he's not like skating 100 miles an hour and he's not like running guys over. So maybe there's this impression that he's not trying, but he is. He's very competitive. He's super. I've been very impressed to get to know him. He's a great athlete. He's a really talented kid. Um, and his style is more, he plays a very poised, calm game. And I think some people, sometimes that's mistaken for something which shouldn't be. So, yeah, I mean, I think he started slow. Like a lot of our guys didn't start great in October. And whether that was just, the residual from playing a long time last year or, getting going when you know how long the season is and like the grind it is. Uh, I don't know, but I think once really from November on, Bouch as well has played really. He's done a good job for us. So, yeah, he's an important player, and I think sometimes he probably takes too much criticism.
Another guy who competes his ass off but has had an up and down season is Stuart Skinner. What have you seen from your goaltending as a whole, not to single him out? And you mentioned, in your first answer that obviously it's really kept you in games at times when you haven't had your A-level stuff. How would you evaluate his season?
Yeah, I would say I would put him in that same category. I thought his October wasn't great. I really I'm trying to think of guys who did start well. There weren't too many. Like I think as general art, but we weren't terrible in October. We just weren't at the same level. And I think Stewart was in that category where, but once, I don't know, have his numbers off the top of my head, but since November, it's very impressive. Like he's done a really good job for us. And same thing with Pick. Calvin Pickett's done a really good job in not as many games. Like obviously, Stewart's gotten the majority of the work, but we try to get Pick in there at least once a week, so he stays fresh. And I think Pick's won like 10 of his last 11 or 12. Like he's really been good lately too. So yeah, I understand there's a lot of attention on the goaltending position, and I've seen that before. And I've seen for some reason certain goalies just don't maybe get the benefit of the doubt if they're not perfect all the time. And you if you watch a lot of hockey, you'll see great goalies have bad stretches. They just do. And so if you don't follow it that closely, you might think that there's certain goalies that are somewhat immune to the criticism, but they have bad times too. They just don't get as much attention when it happens. I'm not sure how that works or why it works. Corey Crawford was that way. Like for whatever reason, he wasn't viewed as like maybe in the same echelon, but he was such a good goalie for us in Chicago those years. And I never really understood why he was criticized if he wasn't perfect all the time. But even though he won cups, it sort of didn't matter. Like other guys who hadn't won get a long runway of like they're these put on these pedestals. So that's life. And I think Stu's got a really good demeanor and approach. He's a pretty even keel guy. He's got a good demeanor for it. So I think that if you watch closely, he's done a good job for us.
Yeah, I mean, we are coming on the heels of Four Nations Faceoff, and Jordan Binnington was rock solid, and he was criticized the entire way through the tournament for Canada, and he's now 2-0 in winner-take-all championship games in Boston. So enough said there. So just for clarity, there seemed to be some sort of rumbling out there. Hey, Edmonton might look to improve their goaltending. You're comfortable with what you have?
Yeah, I like the way these guys have played, and we're part of it is we're going to look at everything to improve our team. So I'm not making any declarations, but I don't view that as something that's holding us back right now.
So call me crazy, but I'm looking at your cap table. I'm looking at your roster situation, and Evander Kane, I believe, has now started to skate on his own as he progresses through his, I guess you would call it multiple rehabs because it's been a process for him. but we're getting inching closer to March 7th, and I'm looking at it saying maybe the Oilers only really might be able to do one move. Is that out of the realm of possibility? Like, could it really boil down to if Evander Kane is healthy enough to play at some point during this regular season? And I'm sure you're waiting on some word from your doctors that you might only really have one stab at this.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, that's just cap wise, that's accurate. No, because you just got to do the math and look, if Vander's going to be back before the playoffs, then that situation is pretty specific. There's not much money there. But you're right. We don't have a great handle on that quite yet. I think, we're still, what is it, 8 or 9 weeks out from the end of the season. As we get that week of the deadline, like we'll be about 6 weeks from the end of the season. So we'll know where he is relative to his return to play. And I think the doctor can make a better, prediction or assessment as to, yes, he's going to be back in 3 to 4 weeks, or he's going to be back in 6 to 8 weeks. So then at that point, we'll be able to know that we don't have that answer yet, which is why we're sort of operating under multiple scenarios, and we have to do our planning. I guess either he will be back and that changes the cap availability, or if he won't be back until sometime in May, then it changes it the other way where we have more ability to add players. So that's going to be something we'll get clarity on that week leading into the deadline. So, but we're operating under, multiple scenarios with our staff, and it's been fun. I mean, there's a lot of different options we have, and we've talked a lot, and like 95% of which will never happen, but that's what we're here to do.
You said it's been fun. I'm like, are you winking? Like, has it really been fun?
For me, it's been fun just because, I enjoy that part of it. I enjoy, the dialogue and the challenge of trying to put a team together. And, sometimes it's looking back at the last several years, it's not the team that adds the most players. Most of the time, it's the team that ends up winning usually doesn't add a lot. I mean, they tend to do smaller, not always, but I think if you're looking more often than not, because you have a good group, you don't want to necessarily change a lot leading into, then there's not that much time from the deadline to sort of incorporate a bunch of new players and establish their roles and find out the chemistry. So if you bring in a lot of new players, that can be a real challenge.
It's sort of like the team that wins the summer, so to speak. They typically don't have a great season, and then the same team that is, brings in the splashiest deadline piece, sometimes you lose in the first round. You never know.
Right.
But for clarity, March 1st-ish would be kind of like a good idea to know about Kane one way or the other?
Yeah, I think that week, it won't be like the day before the deadline, but that week leading into the deadline, we'll need to get an answer from our doctor to his assessment on when realistically is Evander going to be ready to. I mean, skating is one thing, which is obviously you need to be able to get back on the ice, but to be able to actually play in the game is like a lot of other thresholds you have to meet. So we don't know yet when that will be, but we're going to have to get that answer from him at some point.
And how has John Klingberg, I know it's a limited sample size to this point, but what have you seen from him, and how might he impact or make your life a little bit easier on that front if he can play to the level that you think he might?
Yeah, well, so John's played 5 games, I think. He's been with us for a couple of weeks before we broke, 2 or 3 weeks. So, and he's still, as I referenced earlier in this conversation, like we didn't start great as a team in October, which, he's not even really in that part of his season, right? So I think it's probably going to take another month until we really know, like, sort of how good he can be. I think he's shown he's like the best part about it is his hips have held up really well. Like, I think he hadn't played hockey in over a year. So the question is, physically, he had, a lot of, procedures on, is a big deal to have the things that he did, but he's felt great. So I think now it's a matter of more the game reps and the timing of being able to be effective. And I think we've seen flashes of it, but I don't even expect to kind of evaluate how much of an impact John can make probably for another 5 or 6 weeks when he's had, at that point. But I think it's trending in a very positive direction. I think it's just we got to give him a chance to just play a lot of games. And just like our team took some time to get going, it's going to take John some time until he's sort of at his best. But it doesn't mean he's not effective now. It just means that I think you'll see his true impact probably 5-6 weeks from now, not so much, right away.
This might sound like a stupid question to ask, given that you have the most highly evolved skater of all time in 97, but with the players that left this team last summer, could you use more speed up front?
That was another question or a narrative that was around our team, is that we're not fast enough. And so there's a couple of things to that. I think number one, playing fast is one thing, which sort of involves quick decisions, good puck movement, and an element of speed too. But it's not strictly just lining up guys who can win, and clock how fast they skate. I think part of it is, how do they play? Do they play sort of a pressure game? Well, Podkolzin's a good example of that. I don't know if he's necessarily a fast skater, but he's a very active player and he pressures the puck really well. It's why he's been effective this year with Leon, is his forechecking and his back checking. So I don't know if we had every one of our players line up and we timed them, maybe it wouldn't be necessarily the fast, like last year would have faster times. But we play, like, there's a few times this year we've played teams and just talking to the GM before the game, and they'll say, I saw you guys play, like, it's the fastest team we've played this year. Just, the way that we move the puck quickly. So I love speed, and certainly if adding a guy who can skate fast would be in the mix, we wouldn't look away from that. But I don't think we're just searching out players that just are their main attribute is skating.
I love it. We're crushing all the narratives.
Okay.
So last question for you, given that you are relatively new on this job with Edmonton, and given what the goal is, and that this team was as close as anyone can come to winning a Stanley Cup without doing so, how do you blend timelines here? Like, we know the push and aggression is to win, but when you approach a deadline like this, do you lean more towards kind of the philosophy that you were just talking about in, hey, sometimes it's not always the biggest move that wins? Is it curated fit? Like, how would you size up what you're thinking heading into it?
Well, I think you're not trying to do something just to make a splash, which is more of like a public relations type thing. That's not what we're trying to do.
You're not trying to win press conferences.
No, I think we're trying to find the best players that we can add to the mix that's going to complement. We do things well right now. Like, we don't have a lot of glaring weaknesses. I think there's, to me, it was telling, like, watching the tournament, and it was instructive, I think, is, to me, that was playoff hockey last night that we watched. And that event it's almost like a totally different sport, I think. Like, you watch, there was just, obviously certain players played well, certain other players who are great players, they didn't play as well, and I think it's instructive, though, as to the game is different in the playoffs. So that's really what we're looking towards, that, as opposed to looking towards in the regular season. We got to play them. We've got 27 games left. But I think I've always thought, even going back, when I first started, you almost need like two different teams to win a Stanley Cup. You need to win enough games to get into the playoffs. And, like, sometimes you need guys that can get you there. But then once the playoffs start, you almost need like a team within a team that now can you, and if it's the same players, it'd be great. Can they kind of, modify their game to then play what is required. If you were there at the event, like it was very entertaining hockey, but it was much different than watching a game from a month ago. Like you just pick a random game from January.
It's also going to be different than June because just top to bottom, the teams aren't as talented, right?
Correct. Yeah. And I think that's the thing is like everybody in all those games were great players, and you don't have that on any NHL team. There's more of a disparity, much more of a disparity in the talent. So I think what we're trying to do is to find what combination would give us the best. So I'm not ruling anything out, but I'm also not looking at it like we need to get that person because that one person is the sort of missing ingredient. I don't see us as having a big missing ingredient right now, but we're trying to build up sort of the collective to be as good as it can be. Luckily, we've got some great players. We've talked about some of them already, but like Darnell's had a great year too, and we got Hyman and Nuge. Like we've got a lot of really good players. Fortunately, like we don't have to go find that. I think what we've got to do is try to surround those players with the right pieces, which they may or may not be like the sexy name, but I think we're hoping that the right group will come together to give us the best chance when the playoffs roll around.
I know you aren't winking now, but that's actually the fun part, is trying to find that last missing piece. A lot of people have been saying it's one position for the Oilers or one missing ingredient. I think the fact that you're going in open-ended and with eyes wide open is so fascinating. Stan, really enjoyed the conversation. Best of luck to you and the Edmonton Oilers down the stretch, and enjoy the trade deadline.
Thanks, Frank. Appreciate it.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Saravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe button.